I'm dying, marry me and inherit everything. The old Duke said it as if he were offering tea. No hesitation. No softness. Just a sentence that rearranged Marrowan Vale's entire life in a single breath. I have months, not years, he continued, his voice steady despite the faint tremor in his hand. When I am gone, you will inherit my title, my estates, and a fortune large enough to erase your family's debts forever. The fire snapped sharply in the grate. Marrowan could taste metal at the back of her tongue. Fear, or disbelief, she couldn't tell which. She had expected cruelty. She had prepared herself for humiliation, for being inspected like livestock, for a bargain she would have to survive rather than accept. But this? This was too clean. Too calm. You don't even know me, she whispered. The Duke's eyes lifted to hers, sharp, unsettlingly aware. I know enough, he said. You are desperate. You are unprotected. And you are strong enough not to break when the truth reveals itself. Her pulse stumbled. What truth? For the first time, the Duke hesitated. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate, as though the house itself were listening. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice until it felt like a secret meant only for her, and for the walls. My death, he said quietly, is not the dangerous part of this arrangement. Something shifted in the shadows behind him. And if you become my wife, he finished, you will learn exactly why so many before you refused, and why none of them ever truly left. The fire dimmed. The room seemed to breathe. And in that moment, Marrowan understood. This marriage was not an escape. It was an entrance. Marrowan Vale learned the sound of ruin long before she learned its meaning. It was not loud. It did not arrive with shouting or broken doors. It crept in quietly, through letters folded too carefully, through meals that grew smaller without explanation, through her father's shoulders slowly curving inward as though he were bowing to an invisible weight. By the time the creditors stopped pretending to be polite, ruin had already settled in. The house they rented now stood at the edge of town, narrow and cold, its walls thin enough that the wind seemed to breathe through them at night. Marrowan woke each morning with the same thought pressing against her ribs, how long before this too is taken? She tied her hair back with a ribbon that had once belonged to her mother and went downstairs to find her father seated at the table, a single letter laid neatly before him. He did not look up. You've been awake since dawn, she said gently. Yes. His voice was dry. I did not sleep. She noticed then the seal on the letter, black wax, impressed with a raven clutching a crown. The emblem stirred something uneasy in her memory. Blackthorne. Her stomach tightened. Where did that come from? She asked. Her father folded his hands together, then unfolded them again. From the Duke of Blackthorne. The name fell into the room like a dropped blade. Marrowan remained standing. Why would a duke write to us? He requires a wife. The words felt unreal, as though they belonged to someone else's life. And you answered him, she said. I listened, her father corrected. He made an offer. Her pulse began to race. An offer that involves me. Silence. That was answer enough. You could not possibly think. He is old, her father said quickly. Gravely ill. The doctors give him 6 months. A year at most. Her hands curled into fists. And after? He leaves everything to his wife. Everything. Marrowan sat down slowly, the floor tilting beneath her. You sold me, she said, not accusing, not loud, just stating the truth as it revealed itself. Her father's face twisted. I saved us. The words echoed, hollow and sharp. By giving me away. By ensuring you survive, he snapped, then immediately looked ashamed. You think I wanted this? You think I don't hate myself for even considering it? Marrowan pressed her fingers to her temples. Images flooded her mind, her mother's final days, the cold nights, the way hunger made even pride negotiable. "What kind of man is he?" she asked quietly. Her father hesitated. "Not a kind one." Blackthorne House rose from the hills like a thing that had outlived every attempt to destroy it. The carriage slowed as it approached the iron gates, their bars twisted into shapes that suggested wings and claws. Marowyn's breath fogged the window as she stared out at the estate beyond, endless grounds, dark trees, stone towers piercing the gray sky. This was not a place built for joy. A footman opened the carriage door, his expression neutral, his eyes carefully avoiding hers. She stepped down, smoothing her dress with hands that refused to stop trembling. Inside, the house smelled of old stone and burning wood. Every sound echoed, her footsteps, the distant tick of a clock, the murmur of voices behind closed doors. She was led through corridors lined with portraits. None of the women smiled. At last, she was shown into a study warmed by firelight. The Duke of Blackthorne sat alone. He was older than she had imagined, his hair silvered, his frame lean beneath layers of dark wool. His hands rested on the arm of his chair, one gripping a cane carved with the same raven crest. He did not rise. "You may sit," he said. Marowyn remained standing. "I was told you are dying," she said, meeting his gaze. A flicker of amusement crossed his eyes. "I am. And you wish to marry me?" "Yes." "And if I refuse?" "Then you leave," he replied calmly. "And your family loses the protection my name would offer." The fire crackled loudly. She took a steadying breath. "Why me?" The Duke studied her with unsettling focus. "Because you are desperate," he said. "And because you will endure what others could not." The words cut deeper than insult. "And what is it I must endure?" she asked. For the first time, the Duke hesitated. "My death," he said finally, "will not be the end of your trials." Something cold slid down her spine. "What happens after?" she whispered. The Duke leaned forward, his voice dropping. "After," he said, "you will discover what Blackthorne truly requires of a duchess." The fire dimmed. The shadows lengthened. And Marowyn understood. This bargain was not meant to save her. It was meant to bind her. Marowyn did not sleep that night. The guest chamber prepared for her was vast and beautifully appointed, yet it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a room waiting for its next occupant to fail. The bed curtains were heavy velvet, drawn back as if in invitation, or warning. A fire burned low in the hearth, its glow unable to soften the cold that seemed embedded in the stone itself. Blackthorne House was never silent. At first, she thought it was the wind, the sigh through the eaves, the distant groan of old beams adjusting to the night. But as the hours stretched on, the sounds became deliberate. A measured creak along the corridor. A soft knock that never came again. Footsteps that stopped just beyond her door. She rose at last, wrapping her shawl tightly around herself, and pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing. Still, the sense of being observed lingered, heavy and undeniable. "Endure," the Duke's voice echoed in her mind. At dawn, a maid arrived to escort her to breakfast. The woman introduced herself as Eliza, her tone polite but guarded, her eyes flicking frequently toward the ceiling as though listening for something beyond Marowyn's hearing. "The Duke keeps early hours," Eliza said as they walked. "He dislikes wasted time." "So I've gathered," Marowyn replied. The dining room was long and narrow, its windows tall and narrow as well, letting in pale morning light that did nothing to warm the space. The Duke sat at the head of the table, already finished with his meal. "You look rested," he observed. Marowyn took her seat. "I did not sleep." "Good," he said mildly. "You should never sleep too easily in this house." Her fingers tightened around her teacup. "I have questions," she said. "And I have answers I will not give," he replied without apology. "Choose carefully." She held his gaze. What happened to your previous wife? A flicker, just a flicker, passed through his eyes. She left. Merowyn frowned. I was told she died. The Duke's mouth curved faintly. Both can be true. A chill traced her spine. Before she could press further, the doors opened and another man entered the room. He was younger than the Duke by decades, tall, dark-haired, his expression sharp with barely concealed resentment. He did not bow. So, he said, his gaze raking over Merowyn. This is her. The Duke's jaw tightened. Merowyn Vale. My nephew. Corran Blackthorne. Nephew. The word carried weight. Corran's eyes held no curiosity, only calculation. You work quickly, uncle. I do not have the luxury of slowness, the Duke replied. Corran turned to Merowyn. Do you know what you're marrying into? I'm beginning to, she said evenly. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Then you're braver, or more foolish, than you look. The Duke's cane struck the floor once, sharp and final. That will be all. Corran's lips thinned, but he inclined his head slightly before leaving. As the doors closed behind him, the air seemed to exhale. He does not approve, Merowyn said. He is afraid, the Duke corrected. And fear makes men cruel. To me. To anyone who threatens what they believe is theirs. She absorbed that in silence. What do you want from me? She asked finally. The Duke leaned back, studying her as one might study a piece already set in motion. I want you to learn, he said. The house. The people. The rules that are never spoken aloud. And when you die? She asked. His gaze sharpened. Then you will stand alone, he said. And Blackthorne will test whether you deserve to remain. Her pulse quickened. And if I fail? The Duke's expression softened, just enough to be dangerous. Then you will understand why so few survive this inheritance. That night, as Merowyn returned to her chamber, she found something waiting for her on the pillow. A ring. Not ornate. Not delicate. A heavy band of dark metal engraved with the raven crest. She lifted it slowly, dread pooling in her stomach. Inside the band, a single sentence had been etched, its letters worn by time. The house remembers. As she closed her fingers around the ring, a soft sound echoed through the walls. Not a creak. Not the wind. A whisper. And it spoke her name. The ring was cold. Merowyn woke with it pressed into her palm, as though she had clutched it through the night without remembering when she'd closed her fingers around it. Dawn light crept through the curtains in thin, pale lines, catching the dark metal and making the raven crest gleam dully. She did not put it on. Not yet. Instead, she dressed carefully, choosing a gown of soft gray, unadorned, neither servant's plain nor lady's extravagant. It felt important not to declare herself too much of anything. Blackthorne House, she sensed, punished certainty. A knock came at the door. Mrs. Hailwick entered without waiting for an answer. She was tall, straight-backed, her iron-gray hair drawn into a severe knot. Her black dress bore no ornament, no lace, only authority. This, Merowyn understood immediately, was not a servant who fetched and carried. I am Mrs. Hailwick, the woman said. I manage this household. Her gaze flicked to the ring on the bedside table, lingering there a moment too long. You will accompany me, Mrs. Hailwick continued. There are things you must learn. Merowyn followed her through the house, noting how servants paused when Mrs. Hailwick passed, how doors seemed to open for her without instruction. The woman moved as though Blackthorne itself bent around her. They stopped first in the long gallery. These are the rules, Mrs. Hailwick said, her voice precise. Some are spoken. Most are not. She gestured to the portraits lining the walls. Every duchess who has resided here is remembered, she went on. Not for her beauty. Not for her title. For how long she lasted. Merowan studied the faces, women of different ages, different eras. Some looked defiant. Some frightened. One smiled too brightly, her eyes empty. How many left? Merowan asked. Mrs. Hailwick's lips thinned. That depends on your definition of leaving. They continued on. The servants you may trust, Mrs. Hailwick said, are the ones who speak plainly. Flattery here is a currency used by those who want something. And the Duke? Merowan asked. Mrs. Hailwick stopped walking. The Duke, she said carefully, has spent a lifetime containing this house. Containing. The word echoed. He is not cruel, Mrs. Hailwick added. But he is necessary. They reached a narrow staircase Merowan had not seen before, descending into a part of the house that smelled faintly of damp stone and old ink. This area is restricted, Mrs. Hailwick said. You are not to enter without permission. Merowan frowned. Then why show it to me? Mrs. Hailwick turned, meeting her gaze squarely. Because you will be tempted, she said. And temptation, here, has consequences. Before Merowan could ask more, a bell tolled somewhere deep within the house, once, low and resonant. Mrs. Hailwick straightened. The Duke requires you. He was worse. There was no other word for it. The Duke sat slumped slightly in his chair, his breathing shallow, his skin pale enough that the veins beneath stood out sharply. A physician stood nearby, murmuring reassurances that did little to disguise the truth. 6 months, Merowan thought grimly. Perhaps less. When the doctor left, the Duke waved her closer. You saw the ring, he said. Yes. You have questions. Many. Good. His mouth curved faintly. It means you are paying attention. She hesitated. Why does the house react to things? To people? His gaze sharpened. You feel it, then? Yes. The Duke exhaled slowly. Blackthorne was built on older ground. Promises were made here long before my family arrived. My ancestors did not ask permission. They took. And now? And now, he said quietly, the house collects what it is owed. A chill slid through her. And my role? She asked. You will become its anchor, he said. Or its offering. Her breath caught. Those are not equal choices. No, he agreed. But they are the only ones left. That night, Merowan found Corin Blackthorne waiting in the corridor outside her chamber. You should leave, he said without preamble. While you still can. And abandon my family, she replied. Convenient advice. His jaw tightened. You think this ends with a title and a fortune? This house ruins everyone who believes that. Yet you stay, she countered. He looked away. Because it has not yet released me, he said quietly. Before she could respond, the corridor lights dimmed. The walls groaned. And from behind a locked door somewhere below, something struck the wood, once. Hard. Corin stepped back instinctively. You hear that? Merowan whispered. Yes, he said grimly. And now you understand why your wedding cannot wait. The sound came again, closer this time. And Blackthorne House listened. The wedding was set for 7 days later. No announcements were made in the papers. No invitations sent beyond the barest legal requirements. Blackthorne did not celebrate, it secured. Merowan was measured, fitted, instructed. Seamstresses arrived and departed in silence, their eyes averted, their hands quick as if they feared lingering too long. The gown chosen for her was not white, but deep ivory, heavy with age, as though it had been worn before. It belonged to a previous duchess, Mrs. Hailwick said when Merowan questioned it. Her fingers stilled on the fabric. Did she survive? Mrs. Hailwick did not answer. The night before the ceremony, Merowyn stood alone in the chapel attached to the eastern wing, a narrow, stone-vaulted space that smelled of dust and old incense. Candles flickered weakly, casting long shadows that bent unnaturally along the walls. She knelt, not to pray, but to think. This was not faith. This was surrender shaped to look like courage. Footsteps echoed behind her. Corin stood at the entrance, his expression tight with something dangerously close to desperation. "If you walk away now," he said softly, "I will help you. I mean it." Merowyn rose slowly. "Why?" He swallowed. "Because if you stay, the house will bind itself to you. And once that happens, there is no leaving," she finished. His silence confirmed it. "Why hasn't it bound itself to you?" she asked. Corin's laugh was bitter. "Because I was born to it. I am not chosen." That word again. Chosen. "I'm not afraid," she said, though it was not entirely true. "You should be," Corin replied. "The Duke is not marrying you to save you. He's marrying you to replace himself." The words landed hard. Before she could respond, a bell rang, 3 slow tolls. Corin stepped back. "It's begun." The ceremony took place at dawn. Mist clung to the grounds outside the chapel windows, blurring the world beyond into something indistinct and unreal. The Duke was brought in supported by his cane, his movements stiff but deliberate. His gaze never left Merowyn. When she reached the altar, the air changed. She felt it press against her skin, thick and expectant, like a held breath. The officiant spoke, his voice steady but distant, as though he too sensed he was only a formality. The vows were short. Efficient. When it came time for the ring, the Duke pressed the dark band into her hand. "Do you accept the charge of Blackthorne?" he asked quietly, the words not part of any traditional vow. Merowyn hesitated. The house creaked. The candles flared. "Yes," she said. The moment the ring slid onto her finger, the chapel shuddered. Not violently, but unmistakably. A low sound rolled through the stone beneath their feet, ancient and approving. The officiant paled. The Duke exhaled sharply, as though releasing a burden he had carried for decades. "It is done," he murmured. That night, Merowyn did not sleep in her old chamber. She was escorted instead to the Duchess's apartments, rooms long sealed, the air stale with disuse. When the doors opened, a gust of cold swept out, extinguishing several candles at once. The Duke dismissed the servants with a gesture. They were alone. "You should hate me," Merowyn said, her voice unsteady. "I expect you will," the Duke replied. "In time." He lowered himself into a chair, exhaustion finally overtaking him. "I told you I was dying," he said. "But that was not my confession." Her pulse quickened. "What was?" The Duke met her gaze, his eyes burning with urgency. "I am not dying because I am old," he said. "I am dying because the house is finished with me." The words echoed in the vast room. "And now," he continued, "it has chosen you." A sound rose from the walls, not a whisper this time, but a breath. Merowyn's ring burned against her skin. "What happens to you?" she asked. The Duke smiled sadly. "I will finally be allowed to rest." The candles flickered violently. And somewhere deep within Blackthorne, something sealed shut. The morning after the wedding, Merowyn awoke to silence. Not the comforting silence of an empty room, but the heavy, watchful quiet of Blackthorne House. Every shadow seemed to lean toward her, every corner a secret waiting to breathe. She dressed quickly, choosing muted grays and blues, and left her chambers to explore. She needed to understand what she had agreed to, and she feared that knowledge might come too late. The hallways were narrower in daylight, the paintings now revealing eyes that seemed sharper than last night, lips curled in expressions both subtle and threatening. Merowyn had already memorized the faces of the previous duchesses, and now she realized their stories were etched into the very air. She felt their lingering presence like a weight on her shoulders. At breakfast, the Duke sat at the head of the table, his hands resting on the polished wood, his eyes shadowed. He had aged overnight, though Marrowan knew time had little to do with it. She hesitated before speaking. "Yesterday, what you said about the house choosing me," she began, her voice quiet. "Do you mean it literally?" The Duke's gaze sharpened. "Yes. And no. Blackthorne tests every duchess. It measures resolve, cunning, and courage. Many before you have failed without ever understanding the reason." She swallowed. "And if I fail?" His lips curved slightly. "Then the house will claim what it believes is owed. And your family will not be spared the consequences." The words, though calm, were more terrifying than anger or shouting could have been. Before she could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Corran entered, his dark eyes glinting. "We need to talk." Marrowan motioned for him to sit, though she kept her hands folded tightly. "About what?" "The inheritance," he said bluntly. "You think you know what you've married into. You do not. The Duke may be old and frail, but the house has a life of its own. It has protected him for decades, and it does not let go lightly." Marrowan frowned. "Protect him from what?" "From people like me," Corran replied, his voice low. "I am heir to Blackthorne if my uncle dies without a wife. The marriage complicates that. So do not mistake my courtesy. I am testing you." Marrowan's pulse quickened. "Testing me? You mean threatening me?" Corran shook his head. "Call it what you like. But this house is dangerous, Miss Vale. You must learn quickly if you wish to survive." That afternoon, she wandered the eastern wing under the guise of familiarizing herself with the estate. The library was a cavernous space, its walls lined with leather-bound tomes. Dust motes floated lazily in the shafts of sunlight, but she was aware of movement in the shadows. A sound, a soft rustle, almost like whispered words, caught her attention. She turned sharply. No one was there. Then a book slid from the top shelf, landing with a dull thump. Marrowan froze, heart hammering. She bent to pick it up, only to find a note tucked inside the pages. "Do not trust the walls. Trust only the living." Her fingers shook. The house had already begun. When she returned to the Duke's chambers that evening, she found him seated by the fire, cane across his lap. His gaze was sharp, but there was exhaustion in it too. "You've seen it," he said. "The first test." "What test?" she asked. "Blackthorne always tests those it takes in," he said simply. "It watches, it whispers, it weighs you against every duchess who has come before. And you," his voice softened. "You will be watched more closely than any other." Marrowan's fingers tightened around the arm of her chair. "Why me? Why not a woman who would simply comply?" The Duke's eyes lingered on her, studying the defiance in her posture. "Because you will endure. You will question. You will act. And you are the only one capable of surviving what is coming." Her breath caught. Endurance had always been her way of life, but here, it felt different. More fragile. More dangerous. A sound rose from the walls again, not a whisper this time, but a low hum, almost like a heartbeat. "You hear it?" she asked. The Duke nodded. "The house is aware. And now, so are you." That night, as she lay in the Duchess's chambers, the ring still cold on her finger, Marrowan understood fully, Blackthorne had chosen her, but it had not forgiven her. Every step forward would be a negotiation, every breath a test, and the shadows were only the beginning. The next day promised lessons she was not ready to learn, but there was no turning back. And in the hallways, unseen but always present, the house waited. The days following the wedding passed in a blur of instruction, observation, and unease. Marrowan quickly learned that Blackthorne House had rhythms of its own, the way the corridors seemed longer at night, the way doors would lock or unlock without hands touching them, and the way the shadows shifted just enough to make her question whether she had imagined them. But the greatest challenge was not the house itself, it was the people who inhabited it. Corin had returned, this time less hostile, his sharp eyes scanning her as she moved through the halls. "You survived the first week," he said bluntly, leaning against the library doorway. "That's more than most do." "I've learned to endure," she replied evenly, though her pulse raced. He narrowed his eyes. "Endurance is not enough here. Blackthorne demands more. It demands cunning. Awareness. Alliances." Merowyn frowned. "Alliances? With whom?" "Not the Duke," Corin said quietly. "Not yet. But there are others." Before she could ask for clarification, a soft voice interrupted. "Merowyn?" She turned to see Eliza, the maid who had first guided her through the house, standing in the doorway. Her expression was hesitant, eyes darting toward the shadows. "You're trusted," Eliza whispered. "By some. But not all. The household is divided, and you must know who will aid you and who will watch you fall." Merowyn blinked. "Aid me?" Eliza nodded. "Even here, survival depends on choice. You cannot trust appearances. Only the living, and only those whose loyalty is proven. Start small. Observe. Learn. And never, ever reveal everything." The warning settled over her like a stone. She nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility and isolation pressing down. Later that evening, she found herself once again in the Duke's chambers. He had grown thinner in the past week, but there was a sharpness to his gaze that betrayed more than frailty. "You have been learning," he said. "I have," she replied. "Good." He paused, a shadow crossing his face. "But you must understand one truth, your inheritance is not guaranteed. Not by my death. Not by law. You must earn it." Merowyn felt a chill. "Earn it?" "The house watches," the Duke said. "And so do those who would claim what they think is theirs. Corin is only the beginning. There are others, relatives, advisors, and friends of the late Duchess, who will test your worth. And Blackthorne will not warn you." Her heart quickened. "And if I fail?" His gaze softened slightly. "Then you will not only lose the fortune, but you may lose yourself." The gravity of his words hung in the air. She had expected danger from the house, from the spirits and shadows. She had not anticipated human treachery. That night, as Merowyn sat in her chambers studying the layouts of the house, a soft knock came at the door. "Enter," she called. Corin stepped in, closing the door behind him. He looked uneasy, an expression she had not seen before. "You're preparing for war," he said bluntly. "I've seen Blackthorne's methods. I've seen it claim women who thought themselves clever. You'll need allies, or you'll fall." Merowyn regarded him steadily. "And you?" Corin hesitated, then met her gaze. "I am your enemy, and your only possible friend. Choose carefully." The words stung, yet she understood. In Blackthorne House, enemies and allies were often indistinguishable. One wrong move could cost her everything, her fortune, her family, even her life. She rose from her chair, meeting his eyes. "Then we understand each other," she said. Corin inclined his head. "For now. But remember, the house listens. The walls remember. And even your allies may betray you." The shadows outside the window seemed to lengthen, curling toward her like living fingers. Merowyn clenched her fists. Endurance alone would not be enough. She would need courage, cunning, and an unshakable will to survive the treacherous game she had entered. As the candles flickered and the night deepened, she felt the weight of her new life settle firmly upon her shoulders. Blackthorne House had chosen her. And she would choose her path through it, whatever the cost. The days grew colder, and with them, the tensions in Blackthorne House deepened. Merowyn quickly discovered that survival here was not simply about endurance or intelligence, it was about reading people, understanding motives, and navigating dangers that lurked behind polite smiles and curt nods. Corin appeared again the morning after she had been left alone to explore the West Wing. His expression was sharper than usual, his dark eyes shadowed with irritation, or calculation. "You've been wandering," he said without preamble, blocking her path. "I'm learning my way," Merowyn replied, keeping her voice calm. She refused to show fear. "Not to him. Not here. The house is full of traps," he warned. "Not just the walls, but the people. Do you understand?" She nodded. "And the Duke? He can protect you. But only so much. His strength is waning." After that, his gaze flicked to the far corridor. "You're on your own." The air between them was tense, but Merowyn held her ground. "I will not fail." Corin smirked slightly. "Confidence is good. Arrogance will kill you faster." That afternoon, she was summoned to the Duke's study. He sat behind his desk, a stack of letters before him. His sharp eyes regarded her as she entered. "You are learning quickly," he observed. "And yet, you do not yet understand the full scope of Blackthorne's challenge." Merowyn tilted her head. "What challenge?" "The people," he said, tapping the desk with a thin, tremulous finger. "They are not as they seem. There are those who wish to see you fail, and those who may wish to see you succeed, though none will act openly." He pushed one of the letters toward her. The seal was broken. Inside, a note in delicate handwriting read, "Trust is a luxury here. Even family will not protect you." Merowyn's heart clenched. "Family? The Duke's relatives are watching," he said quietly. "And your position has made enemies before you even set foot in the rooms they occupy." Her stomach twisted. "What must I do?" "Observe. Learn. And," his voice dropped to almost a whisper, "do not underestimate my nephew." Merowyn swallowed. Corin's presence, though unpredictable, had now become one of the greatest threats she faced. Later that day, Corin appeared in the library as she studied the maps and records of Blackthorne's estates. "You're planning," he said. "Good. Most women here simply endure and pray the house spares them. But planning is useful." "I am not most women," Merowyn replied, her voice steady. He circled her slowly. "You should be cautious, though. Every move you make is watched. The wrong ally, the wrong word, and Blackthorne will strike in ways you cannot predict." She glanced at him sharply. "And if I ally with you?" Corin's expression flickered, something almost like uncertainty. "Then you risk trusting someone who may benefit from your failure. And yet, sometimes necessity outweighs caution." Merowyn's pulse quickened. "Then we have an understanding?" "For now," he said. "But remember this, the Duke trusts you in ways I cannot. That trust is a weapon, as much as a shield. Use it wisely." The following night, Merowyn explored the East Wing. She passed the rooms of the previous duchesses, their doors still closed, as though the house itself refused to let her peer inside. A soft rustle came from the shadows, a whisper of silk on stone. She froze. From the darkness emerged a figure, a maid, unfamiliar, pale and nervous. She handed Merowyn a folded note and vanished without a word. The note read, "Corin is both threat and guide. He watches you, but he is not entirely against you. Learn from him, but do not trust him completely." Merowyn's lips pressed into a thin line. The games were no longer simple. She had to navigate not only the house and its unseen dangers but also the nephew, whose motives remained murky at best. She returned to her chambers, the note clutched tightly in her hand. Blackthorne hummed around her, alive with whispers, creaks, and secrets. The house had chosen her, but it had not forgiven her. And the nephew was already playing. She would have to play too. And she would have to win. Because in Blackthorne House, the stakes were nothing less than her life, her inheritance, and the very essence of who she was. The storm arrived without warning. Rain lashed against the tall windows, wind howling through the eaves of Blackthorne House as though the house itself were testing her resolve. Merowyn had long since learned that weather here was never mere weather, it was an extension of the estate's will. She moved carefully through the dimly lit corridors, the dark velvet of her gown brushing the stone floors. The Duke had summoned her for an urgent meeting in the study. When she arrived, he was standing near the hearth, his fingers gripping the cane tightly, his posture more rigid than she had ever seen. "You've discovered the house's whispers," he said without preamble, eyes scanning hers. "Good. That is necessary. But there is more, truths buried deeper than stone." Merowyn's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He gestured toward the floorboards near the hearth. "Beneath this room lie chambers unknown to all but a few. Blackthorne has secrets, passages, rooms, and documents, that determine who truly controls its legacy. Your inheritance depends on your ability to uncover them." Merowyn swallowed, her hands tightening around the edge of a chair. "And if I fail?" The Duke's gaze softened, tinged with sorrow. "Then all the efforts of my life, my family, my fortune, will vanish. And the house will remember another name, not yours." Before she could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Corran entered, rain dripping from his dark hair, his eyes flashing with both warning and curiosity. "You've been summoned," he said bluntly. "Do you understand what that means?" Merowyn met his gaze steadily. "It means I obey. For now." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen to me carefully. Blackthorne does not forgive ignorance. Every choice you make will be scrutinized. Every word you speak will echo. And some truths are more dangerous than others." Merowyn nodded, absorbing the weight of his warning. She was beginning to realize that Corran's hostility masked an understanding of the house that she would soon have to rely on. That night, she ventured into the restricted wing of the house, guided by the Duke's subtle instructions. The passages were narrow, winding, and colder than the rest of the house, as though the walls themselves held centuries of unspoken secrets. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and the faintest whisper seemed to come from every corner. Finally, she reached a door of ancient oak. It bore a rusted lock, but a small key had been left for her on the mantel, a silent acknowledgment from the Duke that she was ready. The room inside was small but densely packed with shelves and cabinets. Dust lay thick over everything, and the air smelled of old paper and mildew. She moved carefully, running her fingers along the spines of books, the edges of parchments, until a leather-bound ledger caught her eye. Its pages were brittle, ink faded, but the words revealed the hidden dealings of Blackthorne's ancestors, the wills, the secret alliances, and the betrayals that had shaped the house. Merowyn's breath caught as she realized how delicate her position was. Every move, every choice, could be turned against her. And then she saw it, a folded letter, yellowed and sealed with black wax. She broke the seal, hands trembling. "To the Duchess who follows. Trust no one fully. The house rewards only vigilance, courage, and cunning. And beware the nephew, you will find he is both the greatest threat and the most unlikely ally." Merowyn felt a shiver run down her spine. The note confirmed what she had begun to suspect: Corran's intentions were complex, and Blackthorne would not allow her to survive without careful strategy. Returning to her chambers, she found Corran waiting in the hallway. His expression was unreadable, but his presence alone spoke volumes. "You found it," he said quietly. "The ledger." "Yes," she replied. "But I don't understand everything. I'm still learning." Corran's eyes softened, though only slightly. "Then learn quickly. The house remembers everything. It tests your courage, your intelligence, your patience. And if you falter, it will punish you." Merowyn met his gaze steadily. Then I will not falter. A flicker of something, respect, perhaps, passed through Corin's eyes. Good. For now, that is all I ask. But be wary. Not everyone in this house is as honest as they appear. The Duke may trust you, but his family, his advisors, they are already plotting. And they have had decades to understand Blackthorne in ways you cannot imagine. As the storm raged outside, Merowyn felt the weight of her inheritance settle heavily upon her shoulders. The house had chosen her, but it would not yield its secrets willingly. Allies were necessary, enemies were everywhere, and the true battle for Blackthorne was only just beginning. And somewhere deep beneath the stone floors, in the hidden chambers of the estate, the past stirred, watching, judging, waiting. Merowyn knew one thing with certainty: she could no longer rely on endurance alone. If she was to survive, she would need courage, cunning, and the willingness to play the games the house demanded. Blackthorne was alive. And it was watching. The dawn that broke over Blackthorne House was pale and heavy with mist, the estate shrouded in the lingering breath of the storm that had raged through the night. Merowyn stood at the edge of the balcony, her fingers wrapped tightly around the dark metal railing, the raven-engraved ring cold against her skin. For the first time, she felt the weight of her position, not as a bride to a dying man, not as a pawn in her father's desperate schemes, but as the Duchess-in-waiting, chosen by a house that had tested her in ways she could never have imagined. The Duke's chambers were empty when she descended the grand staircase. No servants lingered, the house seemed to be holding its breath. She felt it in the air, the subtle hum that had accompanied every moment of trial since her arrival. Blackthorne was awake, aware, and it was watching her now more closely than ever. She found the Duke in the library, seated by the fire with his cane across his lap. His eyes, though dimmed by illness, held a sharpness that belied the frailty of his body. "You survived," he said simply, the words carrying both approval and relief. "I did," Merowyn replied, her voice steady. "But not alone." He tilted his head, studying her. "Ah. Corin." Merowyn hesitated. "He helped me, sometimes. But I never fully trusted him." "Good," the Duke said, a faint smile crossing his lips. "Trust is earned here, not given. And you have learned that better than most." A letter arrived, delivered silently by Eliza. Merowyn unfolded it, recognizing Corin's handwriting. "You have proven yourself. The house acknowledges your courage, your wit, and your endurance. Use it well. And beware, not all allies are apparent. The inheritance will be yours only if you continue to play the game wisely. Corin." Merowyn's pulse quickened. She had survived the tests of the house, the subtle threats of the Duke's family, and the whispers of the walls themselves. But the final trial awaited, the Duke's final confession, the truth behind why he had chosen her. "Merowyn," the Duke said softly, his voice weaker than usual. "There is something I must tell you. Something I should have told you the night we were wed." She drew closer, sensing the gravity in his tone. "I did not marry you simply because I was dying," he said, each word deliberate. "I married you because you are the only one I have seen capable of enduring Blackthorne, and changing it. My time is ending, yes, but the house, it will live on. And it needs a duchess who can understand it, guide it, and, if necessary, fight it." Merowyn swallowed, her chest tightening. "You chose me because, you saw strength in me." "Yes," he replied, his eyes glimmering with something softer than authority, perhaps hope. "Strength, yes. And honesty. Courage. You do not fear the house, you respect it. And that is why Blackthorne will allow you to inherit its legacy." She knelt beside him, grasping his hand. "I will not fail you. I will not fail the house." The Duke's lips curved into a faint smile. "I know. And that is why I can rest. My time here is ending, but your story, your reign, begins." The hours passed in quiet reflection. The storm had ended, leaving behind a sky washed pale and silver. The house seemed to exhale, its oppressive weight lifting slightly, acknowledging that the final test had been met. When the Duke passed, it was gentle, almost peaceful. Merowyn sat beside him, feeling both grief and relief. She was alone, yet no longer powerless. Blackthorne had chosen her, and she had earned its trust, its secrets, and, ultimately, its inheritance. Corrin appeared once more at her side, his expression unreadable. "You've done what most could not," he said quietly. "The house respects you. That is rare." Merowyn met his gaze. "And now? What happens now?" He considered her question, then inclined his head. "Now, you lead. The house is yours. But remember, every choice you make will echo. And some echoes will reach farther than you think." She nodded, feeling the enormity of her responsibility settle firmly upon her shoulders. The legacy of Blackthorne was no longer a distant promise, it was hers to protect, to guide, and to transform. As she walked through the halls, the portraits of previous duchesses seemed to regard her differently now, not with judgment, but with acknowledgement. She had survived. She had endured. And she had claimed her place. At last, Merowyn reached the balcony once more, the morning light spilling over the estate. The wind lifted her hair, carried with it the whispers of Blackthorne's past, present, and future. For the first time, she felt the true weight of power, tempered with responsibility. The house had tested her, the nephew had challenged her, and the shadows had tried to claim her. But she had emerged not merely as a survivor, but as a duchess, wise, vigilant, and unyielding. And in the distance, the estate stretched endlessly, a kingdom of stone, shadows, and secrets, now hers to command. Blackthorne House had chosen her. And she would not fail. The end.